merciful death. Now you love your precious gift.
Welcome back, gorgeous listeners, to the Acolyte Podcast. Today, we are here to do a little dive into the character of Louis de Pointe Du Lac, created by the renowned author Anne Rice, and discuss the newest iteration of this character as portrayed in AMC's Interview with the Vampire, versus his depiction in the 1994 film of the same title. In my previous video, linked in the description below, we briefly touched on the changes show's creator Roland Jones and team have decided upon to reimagine the great Vampire Chronicles. The first obvious of these being the period of time our story takes place. The next being the racial changes to many of the main characters.
Was your man's escort sent to these states?
I was hungry.
Stone's throw from your place of business. What were you thinking?
Disrespecting me.
How did he do that?
He told me I did a good job.
You are a library of confusion.
Some things you don't get about America, Lestat.
Yes, let's have this conversation again.
Color, white, Creole, French, queer, half queer, mostly queer. What is it?
Non-discriminating.
Complicated situation we got here is what I'm saying.
A couple of parish priests go missing. People say fine. Most likely kid fiddlers. But this was an important man in town. The police will be looking for this man, fledgling.
That's why we got this piece here.
No, you need to show restraint, fledgling.
You need to stop using that word right now, because it sounded a little like slave. Well, that's what it fucking sound like. It's what it feel like sometimes.
And the carousel comes around again.
Fuck you.
Va-te-faire foutre aussi.
The 1994 film starred Brad Pitt as our first ever true broody bloodsucker, staying true to the book's timeline of newly established New Orleans during the peak times of slavery in the South. In 2022's version, our Louis is the descendant of that same Louis of the 18th century. His racial change is a very pleasant surprise that adds the opportunity of depth for Louis' character that was harder to buy from a brooding slave owner. Let's all be honest with ourselves. Jacob Anderson beautifully presents us with the true inner turmoil that fleshes out all the aspects that made us fall in love with Louis de Pointe Du Lac. And of course, this leaves us with a big question. What is Louis of the 1900s if not a plantation owner? What was he to do to support his household of his mother, his brother, and his sister? Well, become a pimp in New Orleans' red light district, of course. Storyville was a true district in the city of New Orleans from 1897 to 1972 by the streets of North Robertson, Iberville, Basin, and St. Louis, in which prostitution was tolerated and regulated. And I feel adding this layer to Louis, this new modern Louis, lends to the natural strife that we saw in the original iteration of his relationships with each member of his family. This lends to the true nature of his character, which is so driven by his struggle to maintain a semblance of his humanity after the tragic loss of it. And finally, in 2022, we can all finally be honest with ourselves and admit that Louis and Lestat were the original murder husbands.
You called us murder husbands.
It is something never openly stated in the novels, but I feel this is only because of how there's a lack of explicit sexuality in them. Anne Rice did write sexually explicit novels, yes, but it's clear to any reader of the Vampire Chronicles that her vampires were sensual in nature, not sexual. It was like the whole being of vampirism was sensual in nature. There was no need for any sexuality involved in it. I do not point all of this out as a complaint about the change, but so we as viewers can better understand the characters and origin. And when examining these facts, one must also consider the era which these novels were written in. It was the 70s, and the public at mass doubtfully would have accepted such a display as depicted in the latest iteration of the story. When considering all these changes to Louis as a character, it is important to notice that the core of said character has not changed. He remains a driven Catholic Creole man trying to make recompense of the life he leads by night. Turned the night of his brother's wake instead of long after, as is in the book and 1994 version, but still is driven away by their suspicion. This leading him to cleave tighter to Lestat and away from the mortal constraints, leaving him untethered as he is so beautifully human in his vampire existence. Thank you so much for listening. Be sure to leave a like and comment below. Please support the channel by sharing and subscribing for more content.